Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zolotech, and this past week we had a bunch of news about upcoming iPhones. We have the launch of the iPhone 14 Plus this week, and we also expect some new versions of iOS. We'll talk about that and more in this week's news update for the week of October 3rd, 2022. Now, Apple this week is celebrating reaching 100 million songs. So on Apple Music, they've finally reached 100 million songs, which is pretty incredible, where they started with 1,000 songs in your pocket. So they talk about that and more, but now there's 100 million songs on Apple Music. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Apple is releasing the iPhone 14 Plus this week on Friday. So we've had the other iPhones released already, the 14, 14 Pro, and 14 Pro Max, and they staggered the release. They're replacing the 14 Mini with the 14 Plus instead this year. So I'm curious if you're picking one up, and if you have any questions about it, let me know in the comments below, as I'll be doing an unboxing as soon as I can get my hands on one. Now, YouTube this past week was testing out the possibility of needing premium in order to watch 4K videos. I think this is an extremely bad idea where you would go and select 4K, but you wouldn't be able to do that unless you had premium. Some users were seeing YouTube test this, and I'll post this here from Twitter. You'll see that it was actually requiring them to have premium in order to actually use 4K. I think it's a bad idea to offer something for so long and then all of a sudden charge for it. So hopefully they don't really go this route, but it's something they're apparently testing out. Apple executives this past week talked about the dynamic island in depth and said it's the biggest change to iOS in 5 years since the overall switch to Face ID. I think it's a nice change. I don't think it's anything groundbreaking. It's nice to see those sort of interactions where if you swipe home, and you'll see this is iOS 16.1 betas, and it's a little bit laggy from time to time. I think the interactions are really nice. The crowd seemed to have a nice sort of surprise when they showed this, and I think it's a nice little update and very Apple-like, but I don't think it's groundbreaking, but maybe it will be in the future. Craig Federighi noted that the crowd at Apple Park in the Steve Jobs Theater were enthusiastic about the dynamic island, and that recent UI changes give the iPhone a new strong personality and vitality. I do think it's a nice change, but again, not groundbreaking, but it could be over time. Apple this week placed the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus on the vintage list. This is a 6S, but if you have a 6 or 6 Plus, they actually placed it on the vintage list, and it was released back in September 2014. Typically, anywhere between 5 to 7 years, they'll place it on the vintage list, and it means they typically won't get updates any longer. However, Apple does release iOS updates sometimes to address security issues in older versions, so hopefully we'll see a few more of those if needed. iPhone 14 Pro Max has said to be the best display according to DisplayMate's review. This is over any other iPhone or any other phone in general, so the S22 Ultra and more. I think this display is pretty phenomenal now that it goes up to 2000 nits. It looks great, and I think it's a little bit better than the 13 Pro Max just in overall sharpness. There's something different about it, and it doesn't bother my eyes as far as PWM. So I think it is a bump up and definitely looks great. I'm sure some people will actually argue with that if they have an S22 or something like that. They're both great displays, but this is rated higher according to DisplayMate. iPhone 14 sales appear to be poor, not the 14 Pro or Pro Max, but sales in general, according to analyst SellCell, who stated that the iPhone 14 is selling half as well as the 13 did last year. However, iPhone 14 Plus sales are still yet to be seen, but they expect those not to be so great either. However, the 14 Pro and Pro Max are selling extremely well. I personally would love to see Apple go back to a two-model introduction where maybe the 15 Pro, 15 Pro Max would just be the 15, and here's two options. Pick these, discount last year's phones, giving a cheaper option, and then let people just have two options. I think that's what would make sense for a lot of people. Not everyone thinks that, but I would like to see that sort of model return with just a few different color options. Now, as far as weekly deals, Apple is discounting AirPods Pro 2nd generation on their Amazon website, sold directly through Apple. I'll link it in the description. They are affiliate links. I will get a little bit of commission for that, so if you'd like to skip that, just go to Amazon and search for them yourself. You'll see them there, but make sure you're buying them from Apple. Also, they've discounted the 2021 MacBook Pros up to $400 off. So that's a great deal if you're looking for a MacBook Pro, but they're probably going to get a spec bump soon. We'll talk about that in just a moment. This past week, Apple stopped signing iOS 16 and iOS 16.0.1, leaving only iOS 16.0.2 as a way to restore. That's something that's available for all phones. iOS 15.7 is only available for phones that don't get iOS 16. So they've taken away the ability to downgrade to anything really other than iOS 16.0.2 if you need to restore. That means iOS 16.0.3 seems to be very likely this week or next week, as MacRumors has actually seen it in their analytics logs, meaning someone had used that version on their site typically. That could be an Apple employee, and this would be to address a number of issues with iPhone 14 launch bugs, such as the display flicker issue when the not volume, but display brightness is down, where dark parts of the display would sort of flicker. We also have issues with CarPlay where people can't hear what people are saying, and there's much more. So there's definitely some bugs they could work out, and hopefully battery life as well. Also, I would expect as soon as either today or tomorrow or Wednesday, iOS 16.1 Beta 4. Typically, we'll have at least 4 betas, maybe more, but 4 betas, maybe a release candidate, and then a final release either next week or the following week. Of course, we're waiting for macOS Ventura and iPadOS 16 as well, along with some upcoming Apple devices. So all of those things are expected fairly soon. Expect Beta 4 this week, though. So that seems like we could see that in the next couple of days. And of course, that October event apparently is no longer expected at this point. We're expecting just press releases, meaning Apple would bump the specs in the iPad and then bump the specs in MacBooks, but not really offer any new products. However, I'm still hoping there'll be some sort of event. We could also have a November event as well. We've seen that in the past where Apple introduces them in November, releases things in December or early the following year. Now, iPhone 15, of course, is a year away, but we start to hear more and more about that after the iPhone 14 launches. That's because Apple has to ramp up the supply chain and plan ahead. They typically get things ready 3 years in advance. And so there were some rumors some time ago that we could see Touch ID on future iPhones. According to Mark Gurman in his weekend newsletter, he said that this is unlikely again, as Apple was testing it, but with Dynamic Island and more, it seems like Face ID is here to stay. So many of us were hoping for a Touch ID sensor in the power sleep wake button or under the display. Apple apparently tested it, but decided to keep it off their devices since the 8 Plus and some of the iPhone SE generations. Other than that, it looks like it's not going to come back. I wish it would. I would love to see it, but it may never return. According to Ming-Chi Kuo, Apple could try to differentiate future iPhones due to odd sales with the iPhone 14 to differentiate Pro and Pro Max models again, maybe making the telescope zoom or the telephoto zoom with periscope zoom unlikely to show up maybe in the Pro model, but be available in the Pro Max, or something like they've done in the past. I really like that the 14 Pro and Pro Max have the same camera modules and are basically the same phone with different size and batteries. However, it looks like they could try and differentiate that again in the future, so we'll have to wait and see what they do. A new patent shows that Apple is still looking into reverse wireless charging, where we could reverse wireless charge our AirPods or maybe our iPhones. In a recent patent found by Patently Apple, it shows 2 models of iPhone back-to-back charging. This is something they could easily implement, and if we've seen on other devices, they could just enable this and it would work. Hopefully we'll see that in the future. It's not something I would think you'd want to use a lot, but with all of their emergency SOS features, it makes sense that they would have some sort of emergency charging backup as well, whether that be for your AirPods, iPhone, or more. So let me know what you think about that in the comments below. Now, according to Mark Gurman, there's a possibility of a new Apple TV with 4 GB of RAM. This could be by the end of the year. It would again just be a spec bump, not a redesign, but rather just have an improved processor and more RAM for gaming and more. So we could see that along with those upgraded iPads and MacBook spec bumps. However, we're waiting for an updated Mac Pro. Apple talked about a Mac Pro some time ago, that's what's left, and it could have an M2 in it as far as an M2 Extreme, which could have up to 48 core CPUs and 160 core GPUs with up to 384 gigabytes of RAM. We're waiting for the top of the line Mac, and that seems very, very likely. So hopefully we see something soon. We still have nothing as far as the overall design, and they haven't shown it off. So hopefully we'll see that before the end of the year. Of course, we're waiting for Apple's new augmented reality or virtual reality headsets, and recently Tim Cook said in an address at a university in Naples, Italy, that not too long from now, you'll wonder how you led your life without augmented reality. So that should be just around the corner, although it may not be introduced until early next year. And so that's everything as far as the news this past week. Of course, as those iOS updates come out, I'll be sure to keep you informed. And of course, if you'd like to get your hands on this wallpaper, I'll link it in the description like I normally do. If you haven't subscribed already, though, please subscribe. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.